I was born in Harrisonburg, Virginia, but I grew up in Lexington, Virginia.
And what were your mother and father's names?
My father's name was Happy, which is a nickname, but they didn't know him by any other name. It's a long story. I'll shorten it by telling you that he was a great football player in high school, but he was very, very small. And so the newspapers called him Half Pint. And it got shortened to Happy. And he, from the time he was in high school until the day he died, it was Happy. And in the phone book, it had Charles Happy Swink. So people knew who it was. My mother's name was Margaret.
Mm-hmm. Do you know her?
Maiden name?
Yeah.
Turner.
Turner. Okay. Mm-hmm. And then what did your parents do anything for a living?
Yes. They owned a business that owned at VMI, the post exchange, the bookstore, barbershop, secondhand clothing store, all the concessions at all the sporting events.
Oh.
And, yeah, for 30, excuse me, 35 years.
So that must have been, you spent, like you grew up in the...
I did.
VMI.
I did, yes, in that atmosphere.
So where did you attend high school?
Lexington High School.
Lexington High School.
Mm-hmm.
And then you went and started college?
Yes, I went to Lexington High School, and then I went to VMI for a year and a half.
So what year did you graduate high school?
1963.
1963,
Mm-hmm.
and you went to VMI for a year and a half.
Mm-hmm.
And then is that when you enlisted?
Yes, I went, I was, as the kids today would say, I needed to find myself. And so I had a friend who said, well, you know, if you're going to VMI, when you graduate, you normally go into service. Why don't you enlist in the service and then figure out afterwards? So that's what I did. So I enlisted in the Air Force in Roanoke, Virginia.
Why you were in Lexington, was Roanoke the nearest point to enlist?
It was in there, yes, it was.
And so how long was your total service time?
3 years and 2 months.
3 years and 2 months. And what units of assignment during your military career did you have?
I went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas for basic training. And then from there, I went to Maxwell Air Force Base in Montgomery, Alabama.
And then you were deployed to?
Then after that, I was there for a year and a half, and then I got papers to go to Vietnam.
So the reason for enlistment was because you wanted to find yourself and
yeah, you know,
find more purpose.
I was just a rambunctious type of guy that just, you know, I just was so active I couldn't sit still, and
college didn't really.
Yeah, so college wasn't, even though I was at VMI, but I grew up at VMI, and so it was a little bit different for me than it would be for probably anybody else. So I went to service.
And you said in our prior interviews that your father served in World War II under Patton.
George Patton, General George Patton, yes.
And did you feel a family tradition to serve?
No, not so much, because Daddy didn't talk about it, you know. So it wasn't like that I had a big experience or understanding of the military, except for when I went to VMI. So it wasn't really a thing.
Did he say, so he never said, like when you joined the military, did he have any comments at that time, or?
Not really. He said that it's going to be different because you're going to be not asked to do something, you're going to be told to do something. And I understood what he meant. And so, but I didn't have a problem with that. I just didn't. So that's the only comment he made about it. When I was sent to Vietnam, they gave me, I think it was 60 days from the time that I got my papers, and so I went home, and he just said, good luck. He was a very strict man and a man of few words, but when he spoke, you listened. That's all he said.
How did your family feel about Vietnam, the war, and the conflict prior to your departure?
They felt that it was something we had to do, and I told it's a job, and that's the way I felt about it. I didn't think much about going over there and putting on a flak jacket every day and going out and shooting people. I was a medic. Well, actually, I was a dental assistant, so I knew I was going to be working in a hospital. But I didn't know, as I'm sure you asked me later, I didn't know what was going to happen.
To the degree that you...
Yeah.
So you didn't have a sense, would you say you didn't have a sense of danger or risk as much because you were trained as a dental medic, and that you weren't going to be on the front lines at that time?
Correct. And I was sort of a fun-loving, easygoing guy, and I just didn't think about it much. It was just one of those things, well, here we go.
Had you traveled much internationally, or?
None. As a matter of fact, when I was growing up, my sister and I reminisced one time, and we realized we only went on one vacation the whole time. We went to Virginia Beach. That was a big deal. Wow. But other than that, no, I didn't do any traveling.
So that must have been very different.
I think it was, it had to be the first time I ever was on an airplane. It was a new experience.
So when you went to your training in other Air Force bases, you traveled by train, or?
No. When I went to Alabama, I drove, had a car, and I drove. When I took the basic training, I flew.
Okay, so that was...
Yeah. And then when I went to Vietnam, I definitely flew. But it wasn't fancy as a cargo plane. So, yeah.
You feel like maybe flying now is more like flying when you...
It's a little different.
So when you arrived in Southeast Asia, where were you placed?
It's an Air Force base called Tan Son Nhut, which is probably 3 miles outside of Saigon.
And so it felt fairly metropolitan because it was near Saigon, or?
No. It was not rudimentary, rustic, I guess. There was no frills to it at all, which, geez, I don't want to get anybody in trouble. It was dirty. I mean, the Saigon and the surrounding areas, because they didn't have all the modern plumbing stuff. So it was an eye-opener, really, in some ways, because it was nothing like, I don't know what I expected, but it wasn't what I thought it was going to be.
So did you have indoor plumbing in your
area? We did. But the Vietnamese, they had, as you probably read in the past, they had trenches down the side of the streets, and people urinate, and the smell was very prevalent.
Okay, so let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
What were your positions and ranks held during the Vietnam War?
I was a sergeant.
Okay.
The entire time. I got promoted twice, and they offered to make me a master sergeant if I would stay in the service, but I didn't want to do that.
So the major events and engagements and campaigns you were involved with the Tet Offensive, but let's not go, that was towards the end of your service, but
Correct.
were there other ones?
No, not really. As a matter of fact, and I don't know how much you want me to digress, but I had a buddy who was from Wisconsin. He had been there for a couple of months before I got there, but we became fast friends. And he was a very big guy. We were called Mutt and Jeff. And so on the weekends, we would go into Saigon in civilian clothes and sit down and eat lunch. And it was a release from all the other stuff. But it was that calm. And I remember writing letters to my mother and father saying, I don't know what the big deal is, because I don't see a lot of the really intimate stuff. The conflict.
So what years would you say you were going to lunch in Saigon?
In 1967.
Okay. And did you receive any awards or citations during your service in Vietnam?
I did. I got several. One was the citation says that I saved 42 lives under heavy fire or something like that. Anyway, it was once again, I didn't think it was that big a deal, okay? But I was in the medical field, and we weren't used to doing some of the things that I wound up doing. And so, but once again, I thought it was a job. And when the base commander came and said, we're gonna, award you. And I said, for what? And he says, don't be so modest. I heard stories. So I did that. And then I got an Air Force Commendation Medal with an oak leaf cluster for, I think it was overall service there, but I also had volunteered for a couple of things that maybe they considered dangerous. And I'll tell you, oh Lord, before I left to go to Vietnam, I was trying to pacify my mother. I said, Mother, just think, I'm going to be able to see Bob Hope, because that was the deal. You know, he always came. Well, Bob Hope was coming at like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. At 7:30 in the morning, Jimmy and I were sitting in our barracks, and the major of the base came in and said, we got some problems and we need some volunteers. And he said, I'm going to ask everybody here, but y'all have some experience, and so I want to give you first choice. And apparently there had been some action back in the jungles part, and they needed some volunteers to go pick them up. And so I thought, well, we'll pick them up and be back an hour or two. And it was messy, and it was all day, and we didn't get to see Bob Hope. And it was part of getting the Air Force Commendation, the Commendation Medal of the Oak Leaf Cluster. So that's what we did. As you can tell, I don't take things too seriously. But I'd do it all over again, because it changed me in some ways, and I feel good about what I did.
Well, I think you should feel good about what you did. So were discharged? What type of discharge?
I got an honorable discharge.
And what date was that?
October of 1969. Let's see. Yeah, is that right? October 69.
Okay. And that was when they said you can be a master sergeant, and you said no.
Yeah, no, thank you. Okay. With a nice bonus. So, but I didn't, I was, it's not that I didn't enjoy my time, but I knew then I was going to be transferred to different places in the country, in the United States. And I really wasn't much of a traveler. I drove home away. So I wanted to go back home. And so that's what I did.
So it wasn't that you were going to stay in Vietnam. It was because you were going to go home and move around.
Yeah. I knew I was going back to the States because my time was up there.
Okay. And then, do you belong to any veterans associations?
Yeah, I contribute to, oh gosh, I wish I could know the formal name, but it's basically the two of them, the Disabled Veterans Association and the Vietnam Veterans Association. I belong to both those, and I just contribute to it, and they send me nice stickers once in a while.
And how long have you been a member of those groups? Do you know?
Since probably the 90s.
So you went to boot camp, basic training in Alabama. No.
San Antonio, Texas.
San Antonio, Texas.
With the cockroaches.
They were
very big. They told me they were going to be big, but I had no idea. I thought they were just exaggerating.
Did they fly?
No, but they scrambled pretty quickly.
Did your training prepare you for the duties you were expected to perform in Vietnam? How or how not?
I was trained to be a dental assistant with a specialty in oral surgery. And I thought when I got to Vietnam that I would be a dental assistant. But the one difference would be that the oral surgery would be from wounded soldiers from the neck up that just literally had their jaw blown off or whatever. So I wasn't really trained to do what I wound up doing, let's say the last 6 months that I was there.
We'll talk about more, I want to talk more about like the evolution of your job, but were there any particular memorable incidents that occurred in Texas during your training?
Yeah, they wanted me to become a drill sergeant because I had experience in the military VMI marching and stuff. And so there was a period while I was there that they would take some of the trainees and put them in a position to lead troops marching and stuff. And so when I did it, I'm small, but I got a really loud voice. And so the master sergeant there, my trainer at basic training, came to me one day and he said, I want you to consider staying here in Texas and becoming a drill sergeant. And I said, no, thank you.
Was there any, I'm just thinking about most enlisted people are not having any college credits in their, in their resume. And so you're kind of halfway between an officer and an enlisted person. So is there any kind of, and you grew up in the VMI lifestyle, so you were probably very, you could fall into it pretty well.
Right.
Did that give you an advantage, or do you think that
I think it did, more so in that your first year at VMI is rough. As probably any of the military colleges, institutes, they have basic training there, and you're put through the ringer. And so I feel like that gave me an advantage when I went to basic training, and also when I was in Vietnam, because you're put through a lot of steps and I look back on it now and understand why they do that at VMI. My father always said, and here I go digressing, he said, they kid people who go to VMI, but when they look for somebody to lead a platoon or to lead a college, or to lead a company, they'll look to VMI people because they know what they've been through and what they became. So I think that's really helped me in the long run.
Okay, so you arrived in Vietnam and you had been trained in Alabama. So tell me about the training in Alabama for dental.
There were two ways you could go. One is that you could go to school for 6 months, and you would automatically become a corporal, which is 2 stripes. Or you go on the job for 6 months, and you just have 1 as a private. But I was not good with the books, so I said, put me into on the job training. And so that's what I did. And I literally the first day went into a dental clinic and became an assistant.
So what did that job entail?
Well, it was everything. I mean, I was moved around some. I was in oral surgery, which was everything from extractions to mandibular resections, which is if a person has an underbite, we take out part of this is called the ramus, and you take out part of it and put it back, the 2 pieces together, and it reduces the mandible, which is the lower jaw. And so I do that. We had people that had palate cancer, which was a mess. There's just everything to do with the inside of your mouth. And so that's what I did. And I loved it because every day was different. Every patient was different. And fillings, crowns, all that stuff.
Okay, so you did that training.
Mm-hmm.
Also, are you having any girlfriends or significant others?
Let's see.
During this time?
I had a girlfriend that I had met while I was at Maxwell Air Force Base, but it wasn't like we were getting married or anything. It was just I had a girlfriend, and we wrote back and forth. But the transportation of mail and packages was really slow. My mother used to send, and I became very popular in our barracks because at the post exchange, they had all the food and everything and toiletries. And so she'd send me a can about like this, and it had everything from toiletries to chocolate chip cookies. But chocolate chip cookies wound up being crumbs because it just took that long. So I did have that, and the girlfriend and I, her father was in the military, so she understood what we were doing. But it didn't. After I got back, we split up.
So you wrote back and forth during Vietnam, and did that help provide a comfort for you?
Yeah, and mother and my father, most of my mother would write also, and that it was great. I really look forward to that.
Was there ever a phone call that you could have?
Oh, I'm glad you brought that up. That's the daggonest thing. And there are advantages to being a medic in Vietnam because we can do things and that helped officers. And there's the only thing I won't go into particulars, but we did that. And so we were always getting lobsters and steaks sent to our barracks. And so what was the question again? I'm sorry.
A phone call?
Oh, yeah. So I got to know one of the telephone operators, and that was back when they were plugging the things in. And so I'd been there about 6 or 8 months, and he came to me one day and he said, "Look, would you ever think about, would you like to call home sometime?" And I said, "I didn't know we could do that." That was mainly officers. He said, "Well, once you get a cot, bring a cot in and sit over in the corner here somewhere while I'm doing this." And what he did, he would wait until hopefully somebody would call within, say, 50 miles of Lexington, Virginia. And I don't know all the technical things, but he would receive the phone call on his headset, and then he would plug it in, okay, to where the town was that they were going to transmit the call to. Well, what he did was he went and plugged in a separate one that went, because he got the phone number that I was going to call. And so, thank goodness, now it was in the middle of the night, but so, of course, my father picked up the phone and he was in a panic. I said, Daddy. And so I got to talk to them for about 10 minutes, because apparently after 10 minutes, he's got to disconnect and start. Because what he did is he told the person who made the original call, the officer, that he was having trouble getting, and officers understand because it's all the United States. And I'll get you in there at some point. So that's what he did. So I did talk to them one time. It was really cool.
Oh. I don't see.
Fortunately, probably all the people involved in the LA thing are gone, and so I could tell it and not worry about
getting in trouble.
Yeah.
Okay.
To come, and so when we get there, I talked to Charlie Bryant, who went to VMI too, and at one point I said, Charlie, this is so nice what you're doing for Bubba. And he goes, well, who's Bubba? And I thought, oh. So I told him there was Claiborne, and it came sister. Hardly anybody calls him Bubba because they don't know, and they're afraid of him. And so I told him that his sister couldn't pronounce brother. And so I've been calling him Bubba forever. So when they start the proceedings, and Bubba's up the front there, and Charlie Bryant gets up to introduce Claiborne. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, we're here to honor this man who has, this black tie event, who has given us the money to build this wing, and his name is Bubba. And Claiborne stood up, and he knew where I was sitting. He went, I'm going to kill you. So anyway, it was great.
Okay, so we're going to say...
As Claiborne says, we got some stories, and some of them are true.
Okay, so we took a break
yes,
for a
ma'am.
Technical,
okay.
Getting our technical house in order, and now we're back. And so, okay, we talked about the phone call and talking to your parents, and you got 10 minutes to talk to them because of the wonderful operator of the phone house.
It was at the, it's the switchboard.
Switchboard.
Yeah.
Okay, and then, let's see, we're gonna move to, you had your girlfriend, you wrote back and forth with her, but that didn't last. Did you save any of the correspondence between your parents and your
I did.
girlfriend?
I think I have a couple of them. I have a scrapbook that I kept some things. My sister actually was the one, when I got back, I just put them away, and I had a briefcase that they give you, and I just put them in there, and Susan found them and made a scrapbook. So, by the way, I have to tell you, when you're in Vietnam, you get a paycheck, but it goes to the Bank of San Francisco. But you can tell them to give you a certain amount out of that paycheck. And I lived on $50 a month when I was in Vietnam, and the rest of it, and I had hazardous duty pay, regular pay, and then when I got promoted, obviously I got a little bit more. So, but I didn't keep track of any of it. And so when I got back, and this is customary for anybody in the service, you go to the Bank of San Francisco, they give you, because think about it, the briefcase, and they put cash in it. They have to give you cash. Now, then you can then get a certified check or whatever and take it. But they put, so I took the briefcase and I went over in a corner somewhere and counted it out, and it was $14,500. Yeah. And I had no, I am rich. And so I went and bought a Mustang, paid cash. So anyway, I'm bringing that up at the
So you kept the briefcase?
I kept the briefcase, I did, absolutely.
You would think that people would be like mugging people with those briefcases.
Oh, I know it, but you were, when you got back in the States, they wanted to make sure you got home. And I went and got a first-class ticket, and it had a stop in Cleveland, and because I was going to land in Roanoke, Virginia. And so I got a first-class ticket, and the only thing I had was my uniform, so I was on the plane with the uniform. And the stewardesses were asking, what are you doing? And I told them I come back from Vietnam. First of all, I was taken to the airport because you had a place that you debarked, and it took maybe 3 hours to process you. And then they have a really nice taxi that's waiting, took you to the airport. And when you got on the plane, they fed me like I was a king and made an announcement over the loudspeaker that we have a
veteran.
Yeah.
Returning.
That was returning. And I remember the only worry that I had this whole year and a half was, I hope the plane doesn't crash. I really thought about it because I thought, wouldn't it be awful? I wouldn't know, but wouldn't it be awful if I didn't make it? So when I got off the plane in Roanoke, I kissed the ground. But they took very good care of us. So
you felt welcome
back
into the community.
Yeah. Living in a small town that has a military school there, also has WNL, which is like night and day, Washington Lee. But I didn't see the vitriol that I'd heard was around. However, I wound up going to VCU, which at the time was RPI, and the first week I'm there, back then Schaefer Street was a street, but they had a meeting area, a group area. And first week I heard a lot of commotion, and I looked to my right and they were burning the flag. And I thought, yeah, this is it. And there's nothing I can do about it. So I'm sorry to go off on a tangent.
No. I'm gonna try to get you back chronologically into where we're going. Because we've talked about training, but we talked about you arriving in Vietnam. Well, we need to talk about you arriving in Vietnam. Yeah. So you fly on this long plane trip that you've never experienced before, on a cargo plane.
Yeah.
What were your first impressions of arriving?
How hot it was.
Yeah, how hot it was. And then
it was, people talk about being hot, and you could cut the humidity with a knife. It was so daggone hot. I took 3 showers a day like it was a nothing, because you just got so sweaty. It was really something. And then the smell. Smell was the other thing.
So you get to your hospital, mm-hmm. where you start working, and are you doing routine dental mm-hmm. needs, or are you doing routine. Traumatic?
Yeah, I did injuries. That also. The first month I was there, it was really routine, because I was doing general dentistry. And then they moved me to oral surgery. And then I started seeing some stuff. And it was my first impactful thought that, yeah, we've got a war.
It really kind of hit home, mm-hmm. the traumas that mm-hmm. people are facing. So how long do you work in the hospital? Just the hospital?
Yeah. Let's see. I got there in September of '67, and until January of '68. So like 4 months. I was just basically general dentistry for the most part.
And they're just taking people up from the combat mm-hmm. zone and
bringing them in.
Mm-hmm. But they probably had some triaging before they get to you.
Most of them, yeah.
Okay. And but you feel kind of okay still about mm-hmm. your personal safety, mm-hmm. because the base is a safe place.
Yeah, it was, yes. And I felt particularly safe because they didn't want anything to happen to medics. So anything to do with the medical field, you had plenty of safety. And one of the big impacts for me was the appreciation for the Marines. They would do anything. And I felt really secure with them around. I mean, they were sent down. There'd be a hole in the ground big enough to crawl through. They would send Marines down there because what the Viet Cong were doing, they'd build a tunnel, and at the end of the tunnel there'd be a place about this big, and it'd have munitions in it. And they were trying to get rid of them. They'd send a Marine down there, crawling, not knowing what he was going to be faced with. So when people talk about heroes, they were, and they just did everything. And so I had a great appreciation. So if one of them came into the clinic and had an issue, we took care of them right away. And one of the things that I noticed the first 3 months I was there is that we were having soldiers coming from the field who'd been out there for 2 months and wind up with an abscessed tooth or some issue, some rash or something, and it was so far gone. I mean, we were giving them penicillin just to try and clear them up. But they couldn't come in from out of the field. So.
Must have been so miserable.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Because if you've got a toothache, it affects your whole body. It doesn't sound like much, but it really does. And so, but these guys would come in and there'd be a bulge on their gum line because there's just nothing but abscess. So, anyway.
Did you ever encounter the enemy?
Yes.
Can you talk about your first encounter with the enemy?
We went to pick up a pilot that had been shot down, and the Viet Cong obviously saw where the plane was going down, and they were trying to get to him. And about the same time that we encountered the Viet Cong, the Marines were there too. So my encounter was, let's get this pilot out of here. And I didn't think much more than that until that night, I think, when I talked to you on the phone, is that when you realize what you've done, I'm just happy to have a job, okay? And I'm happy to be here because you just never know. And then there were times when I didn't see them eyeball to eyeball, but they were in the trees, they were in the foliage, which was very thick, and you could see the fire coming out of their guns. And then there were times that the ambulances that they used back then were like cracker boxes. They're big old bulky things. And Jimmy most of the time would drive, and I would be reading a map or something, tell him where to go. And there were times when we could hear the bullets or whatever they were shooting bouncing off the ambulances. So.
Do you have any feelings about the strengths and weaknesses of the enemy forces?
Yeah, the strength were, and it's also the weakness, they were proudly dumb. They didn't have the technology we had. And so they fought barefooted, most of them, but they were ruthless, but they just didn't have a lot of smarts to them. And we could have ended that war in 24 hours if we'd just thrown a big one in there and said, okay, we got plenty of these in storage. and we'll be happy to use them if y'all want to continue this thing. But the war was so political that, and I didn't, I read things before I went over there about the politics involved, but I said, oh, it can't be that bad. But it really was. It was ridiculous. I remember one time the Tet Offensive started at Saigon, at Tan Son Nhut, because it was the air base, the big air base was there. And so they were up on water towers, they were in trees, they were doing overrun the base. And our commanding officer had to call Washington to make sure it was okay to shoot back. And I went, oh my gosh. And it was very frustrating at times.
So, okay, let's talk about that. It was January 31st. Mm-hmm. I read that there were apparently a lot of people, the Lunar New Year had a lot of people from South Vietnam were away for the holiday. So
yes.
Did you sense that the base was less occupied?
Yes, I did. And actually, when they first started bombing and the sirens went off, I wasn't sure what was going on. And just about everybody did know. But we were all called to the dispensary for us. And then we're given the information that the Vietnamese, the Viet Cong, had started an offensive. And we didn't know to what extent it was, but it was basically their last hurrah. And if you read the history on it, and I'm not going to get it exactly right, but a colonel that worked in General Westmoreland's office had been looking at things, and he thought that something's not right here. And he surmised that the Viet Cong were going to put up this offensive, and they're going to do it during the Tet, which was Vietnamese New Year. And he kept telling Westmoreland, you need to send a regiment down outside of Saigon because they're going to be there and they're going to overrun it and they're going to take over. And I think it was like, it took this colonel 3 or 4 times talking to Westmoreland. And he says, okay, we'll send a battalion down there. If he hadn't done that, I don't know what would have happened. A bunch more people would have gotten killed. But this, if you read about it, I just read about it a couple years ago. Somebody sent me something on it. And I read it, went, oh my gosh. The little old colonel figured it out. So,
well, they were saying they were amassing so much,
yeah.
Artillery and stuff in preparation that.
Well, but
it was in the jungle, so.
Yeah, and they thought, can't be that big a deal. They don't have enough power to do anything.
So, do you remember that day and like how did you have to go out? I mean, if they were attacking your base, so you didn't have to go. I'm assuming you're not going out to find injured people.
No, they were injured there. We were actually coming back from the mess hall, and there was about 7 of us, and we were walking down the street, and one of them fell into the ditch, and get up, Bobby. We thought maybe he just was not paying attention, slipped and fell in the ditch, and he was shot. He was killed. Viet Cong was on a water tower, and we went, but we still didn't know that what was coming. The sirens hadn't gone off yet, and but when the sirens went off and went back, then it became a war, and you did anything that they asked you to do. It was where everything changed. No more civilian clothes in Saigon anymore. It was just some serious stuff, and you slept when you could.
You said that you have never slept well
since
you returned.
Because you could set your clock. Back then they didn't have the technology they do today. So they just throw rockets in hoping they'd hit something. And between 2:45 and 3:15 in the morning, you could just know. We had a helmet and a flak jacket underneath our bunk bed. And you heard the first slap. It would sound like if you took a board and slapped it against the water, that's what it sounded like. It was just ear piercing. And so when that happened, you got your helmet and flak jacket and got underneath your bed before you even woke up. And so today, I just have a hard time.
You always sleep with a heightened awareness.
Yeah, and invariably between 2:45 and 3:15, I wake up. And so it's just part of what happened.
So that was it was mainly like that time, like they pretty much fought back the Viet Cong very quickly when they attacked your base.
Yeah.
But then I read that there were like 2 other attempts to kind of push through again.
2 more waves.
Yeah.
Yeah.
How did that, well, I guess you were more prepared to realize what was going on.
Yeah, and then also there was an Army helicopter outpost about a mile up the road, and I thought I wasn't doing much, so I volunteered to go out at times with this unit when I wasn't working on the base, and to help bring back wounded soldiers. And it really was, but it didn't, I mean, I remember we had a big open grass area, and at night, because we didn't go anywhere, had a huge board, and they put sheets over it, and they'd show movies. And Jimmy and I'd be sitting there watching the movie, and we look up, and you see the lasers, the red lasers and yellow lasers, coming from planes or helicopters that were firing rockets. And you could see them in the distance. And Jimmy and I both would go, well, I wonder if we're going to get called out. I love this movie, but we're going to get called out. But yeah, it was pretty hot and heavy the last 6 months. And I think I told you on the phone that when you only have 60 days left in country, if they can, they will take you off the front line because they don't want anything to happen to you. And so, as I told you on the phone, the last 60 days, I bagged sandbags. You know.
It must have been your adrenaline must have been like so high from doing all of these missions. But to go and shovel sand would be such a letdown.
Yeah, and I was worried because somebody's taking my place. And I was worried, God, I hope nothing happens to them, you know. But I mean, I could, when I was doing sandbags, you know, they were still shooting rockets and stuff, and you'd hear it. And I mean, we lost a barracks that was 2 barracks down from where mine was. And sometimes, not very often, but sometimes I think about how lucky I was that it wasn't my barracks. And I don't have a picture of that today, but I have it back in the scrapbook, which it just leveled it. And there were some guys in there that I knew. That's one of the things they just try to take you off the front line. They can always do it, but most of the time they can't.
Well, what was the event that you saved 42 soldiers? Can you tell us about that event?
A little bit. There was one of our outposts, and they got overrun, and they sent in another squad, and then they were under heavy fire, and they got wounded, and so they sent me and 2 other ambulances out there. I don't know where. Oh, Jimmy. Maybe Jimmy had left by then. I'm not sure. And I went out there and started patching guys up and putting guys in ambulance. they were maybe 5 miles away, but it seems like forever because it's nothing but dirt roads and you're going through bush and all that. And I made 4 or 5 trips, and there was, what do they call it, hostile fire the whole time. But I was so busy trying to take care of these guys. I didn't think anything about it. I just kept doing what I could, putting them in ambulance and getting them back to the hospital to where the surgeons were waiting for them, and then going back out, you know. And so, like I said, when the major came to me one day and said, "You've been nominated for the medal," and I was so surprised. And it took me probably a month before I felt like, well, maybe I did something special. I don't know, but once again, it was a job, and this was part of the job. But the description says that I wasn't trained to do this, but that I did it under hostile fire. And our mother had the citation that it's all on and the verbiage, and she framed it. And that was what was in the study when Claiborne came over that time. And so that's about it. You know, I'd assume not the rest about it, but.
Okay, but so.
Yeah.
Okay, well, Jimmy, so we need to talk about you and Jimmy because it seems like you guys have quite a relationship. But but also, I'm interested because I feel like we haven't really heard about the evolution of how you went from the operating room to driving the cracker boxes. Mm-hmm. And that seems like a big jump in terms of like responsibilities. And then also you have to assess the people, right? Are you assessing the people as you put them in the ambulance and kind of trying to give them what you can in the field?
Morphine.
Okay, so you're putting in morphine.
Yeah, we're doing a lot of just and ACE bandages, gauze, just anything, because once again, it's only 5 miles away. But if you don't stop the bleeding or whatever, right then, and some of them are going crazy, and you had the morphine.
No, don't apologize. Okay, so let me think where we were when we took our pause, our technical pause. So we were talking about you driving the ambulances and how you started driving the ambulances. You left the operating room. Did they pair you up with Jimmy because Jimmy liked to drive and you liked to ride, or you were good with maps?
No, everybody knew that we were buddies. He was 6'5", weighed about 270 pounds.
And he was from Wisconsin. Did you say
Wisconsin? Sheboygan, Wisconsin.
And what's Jimmy's full name?
James A. Giesel.
Is he still alive?
No, he died a year ago. He worked for Nestle's for like 40 years, and he retired, and his wife passed away of a really freak illness. And he called me, and we were just chatting, and he says, "I think what I want to do is buy a piece of property and like a farmer." I said, "Well, why don't you come down here, and we'll spend a couple days going around." So we went to Amelia, and he found a piece of property up there, and he started building it. And then Jimmy never took care of himself. He was out in his back field one day and had a mini stroke, and it was in the winter, and nobody found him for 24 hours. And they had to take off part of his foot, and so he was on crutches most of the time, or a walker, so he couldn't really finish the house because he was building it. I mean, he helped me build an addition on my house, and then he just got to be a mess, and he passed away. But he was talking about a fun-loving dude. I saw him drink 14 golden Cadillacs one time and never missed a beat. Walked straight there on it. Whew.
So what's in a golden Cadillac?
It's a liqueur
Uh-huh.
and milk, and I don't know what else is in it. I don't partake of that. But
did you get it on? Would you drink those on base? Would he drink those on base or?
Yeah. They had a non-commissioned officers that we could go to. I was not a big drinker. I drank a little beer once in a while, but he could do anything. He's not an alcoholic, but boy, he's just a big dude, and he could hold his liquor. But he also maybe saved my life a couple times. He literally picked me up and put me under his arm and carried me. But he and I were really, really tight, and our bosses knew that we were really close.
So they made you a team.
Yeah, we sort of were a team and did a lot of stuff together.
Okay, so there's a certain point in your career, when you're in Vietnam, that they don't need you in the operating room, and you're going out and you're finding wounded soldiers, and you're triaging them to get them back to base to hopefully get more extensive care.
Right.
What kind of toll does that take on you? Because I don't know if they have, I'm sure someone has calculated the success rates of, casualties and, wounded and all those things. I mean, I'm sure it was greatly improved to World War II or, prior wars, but I'm sure that you recognize people and you're bringing them back and.
Yeah, once again, it was a job, okay? And so I didn't spend much time thinking about, gee whiz, this guy knows over in another department. Hey, maybe he's going to lose his arm or leg or something. I didn't spend much time with it. It was just because there's so much to do. So it didn't,
well,
maybe.
I don't think you could let yourself do
Yeah, I think that's a good way of putting it.
in order to maintain a semblance of.
Because you could go crazy. So it didn't, I had so much nervous energy too, that I was just ready to move, do something. Once in a great while, I'll think about a couple of, it'll remind me of something. And I wonder whatever happened to so-and-so, I told you over the phone that one of the reasons that they take you off the front lines when you got maybe 60 days ago is it was tradition that anybody that worked in the hospital, when they were going to the airport to disembark from Vietnam, go back to the States, you took them in an ambulance. And so his name was McCall, and we took him to the airport. Jimmy and I took him to the airport.
Do you know his full name, or did you just know his nickname?
I don't. It's on the Vietnam Wall up in D.C., but I'm sorry, I can't remember right now what his.
It's okay.
Because we called him Mac, and his last name is McCall, and I don't know what. And I remember him. He had in his locker in the barracks, on the inside was a picture of a brand new Camaro, and he was going to take his money when he got back to the United States. He was going to buy a Camaro, and that's all. And he worked in supply, and he was a real quiet guy. But we took him, and 30 minutes later, they threw a rocket in and hit the airport. And Jim and I were told they got some casualties, and you go pick them up. And we went out there, and there's two sections. There's one where you waiting in line to get on a plane, but the other section is where you fill out some papers that you're leaving Vietnam, blah, blah, blah. And he was in the section that filled the papers, and the rocket hit, and the force of the rocket flew bolts that were on the metal frames of the building. A bolt came out, hit him in the back of the head, and killed him. and the same ambulance that we took him to the airport and we went back and picked him up and brought him back. That had an impact on both Jimmy and me for a long time. Like, damn it, this is not right. This boy was probably an hour away from leaving Vietnam. And we took him back in, okay? Still, I just get so mad. So, and it was never heard of Lee. All he wanted was that Camaro. So anyway, I don't know how we got off on that, but.
No, I mean, that's an important story.
It's, I guess they call it the heart of the war.
How did you and Jimmy feel about because Jimmy left before you.
Mm-hmm.
So how did you feel about as your departure times came closer? And then with that in your mind, like how did it?
Yeah. I'm not gonna lie, I got a little nervous because I was, as Claiborne says, I'm an accident waiting to happen. And I was always getting in trouble, just physically, I'd just do something stupid. And I started getting nervous, like, geez, I want to wake up this morning and I want to go to bed and I want to wake up the next day. Mm-hmm. So it was I think it was probably the most difficult time for me because I couldn't stand sitting still. But at the same time, I knew that I just had to be careful. Because really, it was the only time I was careful. So anyway, yeah.
So what did you guys do for recreation?
Chase snakes.
With what?
They had snakes over there. I mean, big time snakes, and some poisonous. And we would go chase snakes because you had to focus on catching them. You didn't think about the war that much. And so we'd chase snakes. I mean, that's
what did you do once you caught them?
Well, if they were poisonous, we'd kill them.
Was this on the, is this kind of like base, like management of like pest management?
No.
Recreational
just
pest
recreation,
management?
Because, I mean, you'd find snakes in your barracks at times because the foliage there was right there.
And they would
slither
off of it.
So we did that. And digressing, people that know me now know that I can catch snakes. And I remember when I was working at the Country Club, Virginia, a lady called up the golf shop. Wanted to know if I was there. She had a snake on her roof. There was a tree, and the snake had slid off, was on the roof of a tree, and wanted to know if I'd come down and catch it and get rid of it. So anyway,
side benefit.
So that's what we did there was also a concrete basketball court. I remember we played on Thanksgiving night and on Christmas night. Had grilled cheeses for dinner. But we did play some basketball. And of course, Jimmy was good because he was a big dude. So other than that, that was about it. Slept.
Well, I know in the phone call you mentioned that you and Jimmy would decompress and drink like a beer.
Oh yeah, in the barracks. Yeah, we had a cooler. I mean, it was okay. The barracks was like the ones that you see, like in the movie Stripes, where they're lined up. There's probably 10 on each side, and you got a bunk in front of it. And we would get back from doing some stuff, and we'd be sitting on our bunks. His was across from mine, and we start shaking, and the foam would come up the beer. Because we had just realized what we had done. And I remember one of the times we were in the ambulance and we're coming back, and we could hear the shots coming off the ambulance, and I'm ducking. Well, I'm sitting looking at the daggone maps, and I said, "Jimmy, you hear that?" And I said, Jimmy, and he's not answering. I looked over, and he's ducked under the steering wheel. I said, good God, you're going to kill us. The bullet's not going to have anything to do with it. I said, now what do we, another time, we were out in the field, and it got a little hot and heavy, and we jumped in this ditch. And I said, what the heck are we going to do now? And he said, duck. You know, it was just typical him. And I started laughing, silly me. So that was, you know, that was a lot of times. We just laughed it off because I guess we had to, you know.
Yeah. Do you remember any types of discrimination or racial tension amongst the enlisted?
None.
Did you feel like
we were all together? There wasn't any. No.
There was no distinction.
None.
But I mean,
my boss was black, and I called him several times after I left the service. I loved him. Bill Bevins was his name, which is the same name as the guy that was the DJ.
Yeah.
Sergeant Bevins, and he was my boss, and he was tough on me at times, and I never thought this is racial. No.
But I mean, growing up, you grew up in Virginia, so you know about segregation. That it was something that Southerners practiced. So it had to be. I mean, and then the Vietnam is happening at a time where there's civil rights is going on and all these things. So it's kind of a different time.
A personal experience. When I was about 12 years old, my mother sent me to the store, and I was carrying her purse, and 3 black kids jumped out of the bushes and beat the crap out of me and took my wallet. I never ever thought about racist stuff. And Danny, I'm sorry, but I just want to give you a personal. I never ever thought about these daggone black kids. Okay, and it was back when in Lexington they used the N-word, not thinking about it. They just did. But I never, and when I was in the service, I just never, it never dawned on me, okay? And I'm just, that's one of the things that bothers me the most is that why can't we all just get along? It's okay. It is okay. You know, but I think, seeing I'm on a soapbox, I think that some white people think that they're supposed to hate blacks because they've been told that, as opposed to going, hey, this is a cool dude. Okay, and it frustrates the hell out of me. So, but I had the colonel at Maxwell. He was black, and we played golf together. He had heard that I was pretty good, and we played some golf together. So I saw that question, and I went, "What's that about?" Okay, for what it's worth.
But that, I mean,
sorry to go off on a tangent, but
no, I mean, we're interested.
It drives me crazy.
I mean, everybody has different experiences.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, your experiences.
Yeah. And by the way, when I was at VMI, we had several black kids, and they were treated the same way I was. This stuff that's happened at VMI, we're talking about all this stuff. I disagree with it all. Also. First of all, everybody knows when you enter VMI, you're going to be treated the same. It's one of the best parts of VMI. Everybody's treated the same. Now, I don't know what has happened in the last 5 to 10 years, but when I was there, that was never an issue either. So.
Okay, well, let me ask you a lighter question.
Oh, good.
Did you ever, we know you missed Bob Hope, but did you see any entertainers or USO shows?
No, but I will tell you what, the man that I work with now out at Independence, his name's Gift Reed, he owns the place. I was telling that story about missing, because people asked me about Vietnam, and I wanted to make it light. So I said, well, I was told I could see. He looked it up, and it was on a CD, and he gave it to me for Christmas. Oh. So I have the CD of that show that I missed. But I know I never saw any entertainers.
You kind of touched on this earlier, but did you have any interactions or relations with local people? We know that you went and had lunch in Saigon in the early part of your deployment. Did you ever interact with any of the South Vietnamese people?
Oh, yeah, yeah. I have a picture here. I was sent out to villages to help. Once again, they were dumbly proud, and they didn't understand about dental stuff and cleanliness. They ate it was called a betel nut, and they would chew on it, and their teeth would get black, and they thought that was beautiful. But what it did was it irritated the gums to where teeth start falling out. So I went out and I did a lot of surgery because they didn't want to send the dentist out there because they were too valuable and anything happened to them. And so they would send me out there to work on Vietnamese. So I got to know their language a little bit now. Unfortunately, Kung Lao, which is open your mouth, is one of the few things that I remember. But I did meet them. And when I used that expression, you would teach them things for a month and show them the modern technology, what they could do to better themselves. And about 2 months after that, they'd be right back to doing their old ways because they were proud people. So, but that was one of the negatives there, is that we didn't really accomplish much.
Did the outreach kind of give you a sense of, pride though, that you were helping people?
Yeah, oh yeah, sure. Because I mean, a lot of them were in pain, and they were afraid of needles, and so you had to show them how it was okay. There were a couple times where I'd stick the needle in and it just had saline in it, to show them it's okay. I'm not here to hurt you.
Okay, so is there anything more that you want to talk about for your service time in Vietnam that I haven't asked you about?
No, I feel like you've asked me a lot, more than my wife would go, my God, I never heard you talk so much about it. So, no, I don't know. I just think we wasted a lot of people, and we wasted a lot of money and a lot of time in a country. I kept thinking, and Jimmy and I talk about, what is it they have that we need? And it wasn't really anything, but it was more of a where we didn't want them to take over South Vietnam, and it was a matter of false pride that we were going to stop them. We stopped them, but it didn't work. And really, I don't know y'all probably know more than I do about this, but the Paris Peace Accord was a result of us throwing a bomb in there, and in Hanoi or somewhere, I can't remember, but I should read up on it more. But they finally threw something in there, and then was, okay, time out, let's meet and talk. And they met in Paris, and that was it. But really, Vietnam really doesn't have a lot of assets. I think maybe we have clothing's made there, maybe. But other than that, there's no reason for us to really worry about them. Sorry to be so crass, but that's it. Okay. And then the only other thing is, which I briefly touched on, the real heroes are the Marines in the Army. The things that they did to keep us safe. Or incredible. As I said, they had to be half crazy, because if you were sane, you wouldn't do what they did.
But they were.
Yeah. So I remember a Marine came in one time and he had a terrible abscess, and they were going to make him wait an extra day or something, and I found out about it, and I went in the clinic and took care of him. And about a month later, he came back in, and he said, I'd like to see Dr. Swink. And they said, and the nurse said, we don't have a Dr. Swink. We have an airman by the name of Swink. And then, of course, the head of the clinic there got all of, when he found out, I was practicing dentistry when I wasn't permitted to do so. And so I got a letter of reprimand put in my file for about a month. And then the Marine came in and explained to this doctor the circumstances. And the surgeon then went to the base commander and said, we got to take that letter out. So anyway, but that was one of the biggest impressions I have. And when I see a Marine today, well, if he's in a coffee shop or a donut shop or something, he goes to pay, I immediately jump up there and take care of it, because they're the best. Sorry. Okay.
Okay, so after the war, you come back to Virginia because you love Virginia.
Yeah, I wanted to become a dentist, and the dean of admissions at VMI was a friend of, Lexington's only about 7,000 people. And I went to him and told him what I wanted to do, and he said, well, the best thing for you to do is to go to Richmond and go to RPI at the time, became VCU next year. He said, I know the dean up there, I'll take care of this. And he said, and then you just transfer to MCV to dental school, because back in those days you didn't have to apply, you just transferred. And so that's how I got to Richmond. And then I had 3 years of undergraduate, and in my senior year they told me I needed to take 2 years of foreign language, because you need a foreign language to write prescriptions, because if you ever see a prescription, it's in Latin. And so I had flunked Latin when I was in high school. I knew I was going to have trouble. And so I had the oral surgeon that headed up Southeast United States write a letter to the dean down there at MCV and say, put this guy on the floor. He's already a third-year dental student, because he's done everything. And they wouldn't do it. But I understood. You can't make exceptions for something like that. So I rebelled and finished up in English. And I took a job working at Salisbury Country Club, cleaning clubs and picking up the range. And then they needed a pro at Country Club, Virginia, and I applied for it and got the job, and I was there.
So this golfing thing. When did you know that you were a good golfer?
I was on the All Air Force golf team.
That sounds like a recreational activity.
Oh, yes, it was. When I was in Montgomery, Alabama, and so I got pretty good because I was playing golf. In Alabama, man, it stays light till 9 o'clock at night. So we'd leave the clinic and go play 18 holes of golf. One of the dentists was a big avid golfer, and so we played a lot together.
Okay, but you didn't play till you went to Alabama.
No, I played. I played in high school.
Okay, you played.
But it was I played a lot of football, basketball, and baseball. And so in my senior year, high school, I started playing a little golf in summertime. My father was a pretty good golfer, and he really taught me to play. So I got pretty good. And then at VCU, I qualified and played on the golf team and won the state collegiate championship one year. And so.
Did you ever think about going pro?
Nah. I mean, not on the tour type. I wasn't that good. But then when I was working at Country Club Virginia, I won the state assistants championship. And so I thought, well, you know, I'm going to stay in the golf business. But unless you're the head professional, you don't make any money. And one thing led to another, and I had a wife and a child, and so I had my really mentor, Smith Farabee, who, if you've been around Richmond long enough, you'll know who he is. He was a legend. And he convinced me to go in the life insurance business. So that's a quick way how I've changed.
But when you returned to VPI/VCU and you saw the flag burning.
Yes.
But did the student body know that you had been in the service, and did they?
No, because I didn't tell them. I didn't say anything.
Was that a conscious decision, or was it just something you felt like you wanted to do at the time?
It was a conscious decision to let it go. They were all hippies. That's what we called them back then. And I knew they wouldn't understand. So I just hung out with guys that didn't dig that stuff. And I was on the golf team, and so we did a lot of traveling. And I became manager of the basketball team. Oh yeah. When I got to VCU, there were nothing. And Chuck Noe was the coach. And we had a family connection, and he's really the one that got him started. As a matter of fact, Danny, did you go to VCU by any chance?
No. I'm even in Virginia.
Okay. Well, when VCU went to the Final Four, it was a big deal. And one of the sports writers who knew that I'd been a manager, called me, and I said, they keep talking about VCU and how J.D. Barnett and the newer coaches got things. I said, no. The person that really got them started was a guy by the name of Benny Dees. And this is digressive, but you'll love this story. Benny Dees went to New York City, and he was a salesman like you'd never seen before. And he got 3 high school All-Americans from New York City to come to VCU to play basketball. It was the New York Times, in the front page of the sports section, had an article, and the headline was, "The biggest robbery since the Brinks." And Benny Dees got them to come to VCU, and that's what really got it all started. So, I was at VCU for a lot of fun and just get a degree. But it's so they called Benny. He was 80-some years old and lived down on a farm down in Georgia.
Oh, and they got his quotes for the.
Yeah. So I really digressed there, but.
Okay, well, let's talk about in 1975 Saigon Falls, and I guess you're developing the feeling that it wasn't, there wasn't a lot accomplished with the conflict.
Yes.
Do you have any other feelings about when Saigon Falls, like when you heard it, what you were doing?
All the people we lost for no reason. I don't have any regrets about being in the Air Force. And I'm a disabled veteran, so I get all these wonderful benefits at the VA, among other things.
Look at me, were you injured?
Oh, yeah. I'm sorry. I know.
Almost 2 hours into this interview.
Oh, God. Jeez, I hope my time was up.
Could you please tell me about your injury in Vietnam? If you don't want to talk about it.
I was on a hoist I'll make this real quick. I was on a hoist coming down a helicopter to pick up somebody, and they were throwing rockets in, and shrapnel hit me in the leg, and I got disability. I really, I don't think much about it because I felt like that, except my leg getting stiff at times, I felt like I shouldn't be getting disability because I mean, I saw guys that should be getting 100% disability, okay? So I don't, but I've had disability and I get all these benefits at the VA. And I'll get it for the rest of my life. So, and they paid for part of my education. And so, and I had some great experiences. I met some great guys that I wish I'd kept closer contact with besides Jimmy. So I have no complaints. So I don't really complain much about military. Okay. I do complain about the people in DC that have no clue what's going on. And that bothers me a lot. So I'm sorry, but
you wouldn't just drive the ambulances, like you got in planes and
yeah, helicopters.
yeah, helicopters and pulled people in.
Yeah, and there's another thing where the Marines, because the helicopters sitting up there waiting for me and whoever to put wounded on a strapped in hoist and send them up. They're shooting ducks right there. They're sitting right there.
Yeah.
Now, fortunately, the Viet Cong didn't have the artillery that we have today, but they could still wound the helicopter and shoot it down. So
You had to get in and get out.
yeah, in a hurry. So, which suited me because I didn't want to sit still very long anyway.
So which did you prefer, the helicopter duty or the cracker box duty?
Cracker box duty.
Okay.
I like that better.
Okay, so in wrapping up, is there something no one has ever asked you about your service in Vietnam that you wish they would?
I don't think so, because I promise you, this is such an anomaly for me to sit here because,
Do your children know about your service?
they don't know everything. And my youngest one who lives in Richmond, pulled down my scrapbook one time and she came in and said, "Daddy, I'd love to sit down with you sometime and ask you a bunch of questions." And I said, "Okay," but we never have, and I've never brought it up, you know.
It's hard to find the time.
It's just that there were so many heroes that I've either read about, saw, that I think they're the guys you need to talk to. Congressional Medal of Honor winners. At Independence Golf Club, we have a wall there outside, and on it are plaques of all Congressional Medal of Honor winners from the state of Virginia. And I think I'd love to meet every single one of them. And they have a dinner every year, and that moves around the country. But I can't imagine the stories that they tell, and they'll only tell them to the other guys that are there, you know. And Audie Murphy, do you know who Audie Murphy was? He was from Hell and Back as a movie, but look up Audie Murphy, and he was like 5'5". He was from Kentucky, and he won the Congressional Medal of Honor. He was the second most decorated soldier ever. And when you read what he did, you go, "Oh my gosh." So that's why what I did was so minor compared to some of these guys. It's incredible to me.
Yeah, but you never know what you're gonna do until you get to
Yeah,
that circumstance.
yeah.
And if you weren't put in their exact same circumstance, you don't know, you can't discount what you did.
All right, and I'll leave it. My father always said, "You always leave him with a laugh." There was a guy that was also in the barracks with us that was on the top bunk of Jimmy's. And his name was Dennis Wells, and he was from Chicago. And he had mafia connections. And the reason we know that is because every once in a while he'd get a letter, and in it would be pictures of cars. that had been repossessed. And he'd always say, now look, don't be going buying a car when you get back to States. I'm going to give you my phone number. You call me. I'll get you any car you want. Okay, I mean, and he had a pock face and his hair was all curly. At times, to get everybody laughing, he'd set it on fire. He says, and then he brushed it. Anyway, he was a tough dude. Had a gravelly voice on top of that. I mean, it was classic The Sopranos. And so one night they started throwing the rockets in, and it was really heavy. And we just knew at any second now it was going to hit us. As Jimmy would say, the one you don't hear is the one you worry about. And at some point it was so hot and heavy, this voice came, said, "Oh God, please stop. I promise I'll be good from now on." And it was Dennis Wells. He was so scared. I mean, we think this guy, "Give me a gun, I'll go get them." And, oh God, Jimmy and I started laughing. Dennis said, shut up. Anyway.
Did you ever go on any, we really do need to wrap up, but
Sure.
any R&R, like did they send you out
Yeah,
there?
I went to Hawaii.
Oh.
And met a guy that was, same time, we were both in Alabama at the same time. He got orders to go to Hawaii, Hickam Field, and I got orders to go to Vietnam. His name was Joe Lively, and I met him in Hawaii. We're there 5 days. I saw the sun come up every morning before I went to bed. So, we had a great time. But so I went to Hawaii.
Oh.
Dyed my hair orange, and when I got back, the major on the base went ballistic. Shave it. So I had to shave my head. And anyway, like I say, I was a mess.
Huh. Well, I mean, does anybody have anything they want to ask him that I haven't? No. Well, I thank you so much for your time.
Well,
and for opening up to us. And
Yeah.
I hope
Okay.
that you feel good about everything.
I have no idea because I probably don't remember half the stuff you asked me, you know.
Well, you'll get to relive it in the transcript.
Oh, good.